Welcome back to AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie. I'm your host, Anastassia, and today we continue one of my absolute favorite series of this podcast. And this is AI through the lens of storytellers. And we have already talked about the cold seduction in Ex Machina, the contradiction between love for a voice avatar in Her, and the profession of the main protagonist, Theodore, who is a writer, in Her. And then we talked about the personality of Data in Star Trek. And we talked about grief in After Young. And today we go somewhere, I would say, quieter, more intimate, and in many ways, maybe even more devastating and bigger than life. Today we read The Room and we read The Sun, and we discuss love, childhood, loyalty, fate, and memories. And my co-host here and my guest is Professor Rae Muhlstock. She's a scholar, reader, and the kind of a person who walks into a novel or a movie and comes back with questions that even the writer didn't know how to ask. And Rae, I'm really thrilled that we are doing this. And we are doing this about one of my favorite books of the past years, because we're talking about Klara and the Sun of Kazuo Ishiguro, a novel narrated by an artificial friend named Klara. And Klara is a solar-powered, quietly devoted, and I would argue one of the most spiritual AI character which I have ever pleasure to discover in books and in movies. Rae will talk about the plot of a book in a minute. And there is something really exciting because Klara and the Sun will become a movie. So I think that it will be released quite soon in a couple of months. And the director will be Taika Waititi as the starring Jenna Ortega as Klara, the main protagonist, and then Amy Adams as Rosie's mother. I can't wait. So I would love to see this. And I think it's not quite a small thing when a Nobel laureate's mediation and meditation on AI and loneliness becomes a major studio production. And it tells us something about where the cultural conversation in our time is. So we are ready as a society to address very big questions, and art is helping us with that. So Rae, I would just ask you to talk a bit about the plot of the book. What is happening there?
I am one of those professors who I probably infuriate my students because I think plot is always the least interesting thing in a story. But the plot of Klara and the Sun, again, a relatively simple plot. We have a character, Klara, an artificial friend who finds a home. The first part takes us through her looking for the home. Then we follow her into this new home where she becomes part of a family and really learns a lot about what that means. And then her time with the family comes to an end. Right? It's sort of the story of life, is as close to a plot that this novel gets. Now, that's a horrible oversimplification of the complexity of the world that Ishiguro brings us into, the characters we meet, their relationships with each other. And I'm so glad you mentioned these two actors who are going to be playing Klara. And I think they changed the name slightly, Chrissy's name, Amy Adams' character, because their relationship is so stunning in this novel. And one of the most interesting relationships, more interesting than her relationship with the child for whom she is the artificial friend. One of the things I love about Ishiguro is the way he uses plot and voice. So we have these really kind of mundane plots. One of my favorite to talk about in this way is Remains of the Day, also a fabulous film, and Never Let Me Go, my other favorite of his, also a fabulous film. So while quiet science fiction doesn't always lend itself so brilliantly to the big screen, he seems to have a talent for writing these quiet stories that do quite well when scaled up with these absolutely enormous actors. Anthony Hopkins in Remains of the Day, Andrew Garfield, Carey Mulligan, Keira Knightley in Never Let Me Go, and the acting caliber of Jenna Ortega and Amy Adams. They're going to be able to tell the nuances of this story simply with facial expression, simply with the energy that passes between them. And for me as a reader, that's really what this book is about. It's about energy, and what we do with it. What that means in terms of life, in terms of love, in terms of relationships. And Klara as a narrator is so interesting. All of his narrators are so interesting. They always narrate in the first person.
Yeah.
And they don't coddle us as readers. They just bring us right into their world. No explanation. We are meant to understand things, but we are also meant to understand more than these characters. So Ishiguro himself is playing with the energy that passes between a reader and a narrator. We always know both more and less than they know. We see the world for what they can't see in it, their blind spots. We understand. And yet, the nuances of the world that they're in, we are outsiders. So Klara might use terms or phrases, or one of the ones that had me most baffled throughout the early stages of the book was lifted. What does lifted mean? And we're just expected to know because as part of this world, they all know. And yet we also understand, well, Klara, it's not really the sun, right? It's these particles, but no, she sees it as this deity with will and with power and benevolence, the same way we would see a deity. So as you mentioned, spirituality, and that's where I left this book with so many questions.
Yeah. And what was very interesting for me? So the plot, as you said, is really simple. And we have a certain set of expectations when we enter this world, because the characters are based on really eternal archetypes, I would say. And in Klara, so her character is not just one thing, but multiple things. So humans built her for a purpose. And she's this loyal and devoted servant. She's a perfect slave, which is an archetype in its own. So it's a fantasy, but at the same time, there is this ethical horror behind the fantasy, because she is shaped to serve and she cannot register her own self, and she is being willingly erased at the end of the book. So that was kind of, one paintbrush. Another was Klara as a worshipper. And I would really love to discuss this one, because quite rarely I discover an AI character which has a deity for herself. And sun is obviously so common in so many religions. So we have the Ra in Egyptian methodology, and then we have the Helios in Greek cosmology. So sun is nourishing Klara because she's obviously a solar powered. It has a very physical prop for her existence. And she has all kind of theories how to protect this deity. So there is this evil machine she wants to destroy, and she's very preoccupied with the machine. And she herself, she is a machine. So it's kind of interesting that there is this hierarchy of machines within the book itself. And then there was another element to her character, and this existed throughout the literature, and this is this doppelgänger, the double. Because what is the purpose of Klara? And we are discovering this during the set of some events. And Rae, what did you discover there? And obviously, I'm not a literary scholar, so could you maybe kind of comment on my findings and add some of yours?
Yeah, I think your findings are utterly fascinating and really things that had me preoccupied while reading as well. Her erasure at the end, sort of coming to the natural end of her life cycle, but in this very strange, disturbing, and yet ultimately probably exactly how she would want her life to end, just completely surrounded by the sun. I found that moving. Whereas the other threat of erasure, the far more imminent one, and I think utterly terrifying one, is what you're talking about, this sort of purpose. Not her purpose for being created. And that is interesting in and of itself, but her purpose for this family. The purpose she found, right? Maybe not what she was born into, but what she became, as much as we can talk about birth and AI. And I kind of think we can in the same way we can talk about death and AI. So there's so much going on. The sort of perfect slave trope is it's to the extreme in a character like Klara, because we're told throughout, especially the first part, When we see her in the store, she's sort of learning the rules of what it means to be an artificial friend, but also what it means to be AI, an artificial friend without a friend. All right. So just the AI part, not the F part, and all of the rules. And immediately we're told she's different from all other AI or AFs because she's got this incredible ability to observe and to understand what she's seeing. And that understanding creates a tension in the narrative, not just, with knowledge, as I talked about before, but with how she then reasons this threat of being a race, of becoming the doppelganger, which I don't want to do too many spoilers for the readers who might not have read it. I urge you to read it because it is an entirely unique perspective on a danger to AI, a threat from us to AI. We here are an enemy in a way that we can't fathom happening to us. The erasure of self in exchange for someone else. Not sacrifice, but that is part of it. And I would love to talk about the idea of sacrifice and self-sacrifice in this novel. So Klara's willingness to allow this to happen to herself, I think, is a big part of that fantasy. Even what shouldn't be needed of her. All right, this threat that I'm trying so hard not to spoil for the listeners. She is utterly perfect, and we are told that's one of the first things we learn from her is she is perfect. But she's also sort of the perfect slave in her willingness to let it happen to her. Her willingness to put everyone else's intelligence and self above her own. Her willingness to be the sacrifice. Almost as if it's a gift given to her, this potential to sacrifice herself. Now, the thing about sacrifice, and we see it all over the living world. We see animals sacrifice themselves, humans sacrifice themselves out of obligation or out of love. But the ability to sacrifice, and I think part of that is to understand sacrifice as such, not that like knee-jerk response of protecting someone with physical force. We have laws in this country, killing in self-defense, but also in defense of others. I'm not talking about that. Understanding that I am sacrificing myself for you, right? For the benefit of you. We see that all over the living world as maybe a benchmark for life. And when we see it, and we see it at various times with AI characters, Data in Star Trek, we see in The Creator, I don't know if you've seen The Creator, but that's a very fascinating film as well. But we see ideas of sacrifice there, both AI and human characters sacrificing themselves for each other. But it's a benchmark in AI characters because it is a sign of life. And if a character, an AI character or any living character, can understand that they are sacrificing their life in exchange for someone else's, there's life there. There's something we can't deny as life. It's not programming. It's not automatic. It's that understanding of sacrifice. Right? So we can talk about whether or not Klara or really any AI character is performing love, performing sacrifice based on observation, based on doubling or mimicry, repetition, or if it's something genuine. And I think that's something that the film version of After Yang was really trying to explore by giving Yang interiority. We see it in Star Trek with Data in his constant bid for more and more humanity. And I think here we're being asked to understand Klara as having some form of life, something that goes beyond programming in her spirituality and in her sense of sacrifice and obligation to essentially kill another machine in service of her deity.
I sometimes think, looking into this archetype of a person or a machine capable to, let's say, commit a sacrifice of itself, herself, or himself, this is the act of agency. And I think it's a very interesting discussion. What defines agency? And it has some connotation in the discussion of a free will of something and of self. And I think in Ishiguro, so this term self could be considered with very different eyes because, for example, is the self the person who is loving, or is the self the person who is loved and defined by love of others? For example, this child who is lifted, so it's like being provided a CRISPR, treatment and obtaining some genetical abilities to learn more, to perform better. So those lifted children coming to this world with a risk of an illness. Josie's sister dies. She did not make it. She was lifted herself. And Josie now is ill. And we do not know whether she will make it or not throughout the book. And this character, Josie, who is a very gentle character, she's lovely. But herself is being defined not just because she performs certain things, because she acts, but because she's loved by her mother and by the boy and by Klara. And this is kind of, very interesting for me. So sacrifice as an act of agency, and at the same time, the individuality being defined through the eyes of others, and not necessarily because the person is built in one or another way. And I think this is such an opposition to what we are going through with real AI in our contemporary world, where AI, by so many, is not considered being a tool, but being considered more or less as all-knowingly presence, as something coming from the world of the religion. And this question for me is quite big. So even the Pope now said a couple of things about AI. And I am very fearful that AI is becoming a religious movement. So we have churches, we have OpenAI, Meta, we have DeepMind. So those are institutions with enormous power and enormous resources, global reach. And there's this sense of a sacred mission. So they are building something bigger than all of us. Then we have apostles, people like Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg. So when they speak, so sometimes I think they lost the touch. So this humble touch of the baseline of life. And then we have heretics, so people like Gary Marcus criticizing the maths behind today's AI. And I'm, by the way, totally subscribing to what he is saying. We have Jürgen Schmidhuber, another heretics, who actually discovered most of the technologies, and he did not receive the very prestigious Turing Award or a Nobel Prize, and he's very upset about it. And then there are people who are making fun of him. So on social media. So this is kind of, quite similar to what I know from the history of religion. And then we have a cult itself. So millions of followers just try to open the LinkedIn and read all this nonsense of how AI will solve every single problem, how people are no longer needed, how we are losing jobs to AI. And then, of course, there's someone who is kind of, touching this bell of doom. And this is Elisar Yudkowsky, who is writing The One Who Builds It, Then We Will All Die. So saying that there's no way we can build a beneficial and trustworthy AI for all of us. So in Klara and the Sun, and in so many books we're discussing, AI is in the realm of tools. But at the same time, there's this touch of self and personality in connection with the service, in connection with the sacrifice. So how do you think about those religious connotations, beliefs, false beliefs, fate in connection to the book?
I think the book, and I find this in several things we've talked about, and I hope we'll continue to talk about, the rise of AI as a companion comes alongside genetic engineering. They do seem to happen together.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I found so appealing in this novel is how Ishiguro, and he does this, he doesn't really come down on a hard no or yes about anything. It's here are all the different ways humans do life. You make your choice. So speaking of sacrifice, in terms of the lifted, it's not self-sacrifice. The mother is making or the parents are making the sacrifice. In particular, Josie's mother, having already, made this choice and lost in that gamble, is willing to sacrifice Josie to genetic perfection as well. We have another character, a boy, Rick, who is not lifted, and nothing seems to be wrong with him whatsoever. Right? He has this beautiful mind engineering breakthrough work on drones without any of that genetic lifting to make him better than his peers. And yet he's still barred from opportunities, right? Because he's not carrying the right card, right? The right code, the right ID. But what we see throughout the book is that lifting has no benefit, really. The characters we do meet a group of them all at once, and they seem absolutely horrible for the most part. But we don't ever really meet a group of unlifted people. We're told that they exist, but we don't get to meet them because Klara doesn't get to meet them.
Yeah.
Right. And because it's a first person narrative, we really only know what she tells us. And that's always the fun part of first person. It's the reliable narrator. And Ishiguro plays with that by giving us reliable narrators. But our communication with them is what's unreliable, which I find utterly fascinating. So we're shown sacrifice in several different ways. And ultimately, I think where we land, or at least where I land, is that Klara's is more pure. Right, because it comes from a place of love without pressure, without the societal, stigma, which doesn't mean that it is, a burdenless sacrifice. Should it happen, the way it is planned to happen, Klara, as we know her and as she knows herself, will cease to exist. But she's willing to make that sacrifice.
And we can't not to touch so the figure of Capaldi. And so this is the person who will then perform something we don't want to disclose as part of the plot. But he is a believer in the replicability of a human. This is interesting. So how he thinks and what we learn in the book.
He essentially does not believe in the soul, right? The human soul, that if life can be replicated, not reproduced, replicated, right? So not like you have a child, there is now another you, right? A completely different dynamic. And this is utterly fascinating when we think about spirituality and religion, especially the way we're moving from maybe what religion once provided us into what it is now providing and what it will provide in these sci-fi futures. One of the things I find so interesting about what you were saying about AI becoming a religion in our real lives, I wonder if we need a God we can see, right? A God who literally answers our prayers, like, yes, Rae, I will do that for you, as opposed to the looking for sign, the way we kind of classically think about deities as maybe the way Klara thinks about the deity, although there's some really fascinating, maybe glitch moments, which are read as maybe a prophetic moment of her actually communing with her God. Although I'm not sure, I'm looking forward to the film to see how Waititi interprets this, because I'm not entirely sure what to make of it myself. These moments where she talks about literally her vision changing.
Yeah.
And I want to go back through and look for the pattern, because it seems to happen at times where she would have a heightened emotion, right? Where she's either scared or in awe, something, or in love, something like that we as humans have a word for, but that she as AI would not have a word for, because maybe she wasn't meant to experience them. Maybe she was, right? This is always the question with programming. But I'm wondering about us in real life and where we've moved post maybe Industrial Revolution. A historian or someone who works in comparative religion would know much more than I about when that changed, but it's hard not to notice, at least in some of the discourse in this country, the way religion has changed, the way it factors into public life has changed, and what we need from it in our private lives has changed. I think the book is actually showing us that through the way the human characters deal with potential loss, with love, with questions of sacrifice, and the way Klara deals with it. And I think we're being told to get back to our roots in a way that's being shown to us through Klara. This artificial intelligence character tells us more about what it means at the heart of humanity than the human characters do, who are so caught up in the structures of humanity and the niceties and the systems and the rules, as opposed to the feelings and the connections and the relationships. And maybe that's why we often see genetics and AI hand in hand. And maybe why we're now looking for a material God, something that we can have a virtual chat with, something that there's an app for, right? Is there an app for that? A friend was just telling me that she learned how to chat with AI on her phone. I don't know if she means Siri or like I didn't follow up because I was both horrified and amazed by what she was telling me, and I just kind of wanted to let her talk. But this and she was like, "Yeah, it keeps me company." And I kind of look at her. I'm like, "Yeah, but a cat would keep you company." Right.
But
So
just what are you looking for? And the point is, and this is what I'm kind of really trying to teach people in all my courses, and I start with that: keep your agency, because this thing does not understand and reason, but it mimics. And if this is enough for you in this particular moment, I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine if I don't know how to repair my washing machine and AI guiding me through the process in a friendly voice. Yeah, because, otherwise I would need to call for someone who might not have time immediately to help me. But because I know how those things are getting built, and I know that there's no consciousness, there's no reasoning, there's no understanding, and it is as good as we train it, I am not expecting a huge companionship. I might treat my boredom with some experiments, but it is my agency to decide I am currently wasting time or learning something or just experimenting in a domain I have no idea about. What is for me a paradox in the pieces of art, it is all about either the doom of humanity and then the resistance vis-a-vis robots and AI, or AIs are servants, they are tools, companions, but artificial companions, and human might be limited in some abilities physically, even cognitively. But there is still this prevalence of human in the world of AIs. And what I perceive right now is this rise of the narrative of choosiness. Those people who build AI, those are the chosen people. They are equipped with. So just look the manifesto and the book of Alex Karp of Palantir. Yeah. So this prevalence, the force, the strength of those equipped with the knowledge of how to build AI. And then you have conversations with those people and they are very confused. Oh, maybe this thing is conscious. So that means that they might build and code, but they don't understand the math underneath of what they touch. And this is very worrisome for me. And this is why I love looking into art, which is putting us in a future which might be more or less advanced. And let us reconsider scenarios. And this brings the most mammal property, not just human property in us, which is learning from the imaginary scenarios, learning from counterfactuals, without which we cannot achieve causality. If this and that is a given, then that might happen. None AI today learns from counterfactuals. And this is one of the reasons why there's no continuous learning in AIs. And this is why all today's AIs are frozen after being trained on a certain set of data. And in the United States, if you look into the events in Taiwan and in Beijing, they will be interpreted in one way. And if you ask a Chinese AI about the very same, it will be a very different interpretation. If you ask AI about consciousness, it was trained on all the internet. And of course, there are papers on consciousness and books on consciousness there. So it will be capable to chat with you about consciousness and reasoning and understanding. If you deprive AI from this material, it won't respond. Because it does not know the question.
Which brings us to question the I in AI. Is it actually intelligence? You know, you had said earlier it depends on what you're looking for in AI, but I think also why. And that's a question that comes up a lot with the students. Right? Like, yes, we have this tool, but why are you using it right now? What do you want to get out of it and why do you want to use this? if you're building a house, you have an entire toolbox. Why use this one for this situation and this one for that? So, the conversation might be, well, it's a difference using it to do your math homework and using it to do your English homework, right? We don't want students using AI for their generative writing. That's what the humans do. That's what human I, HI is for, right? Use AI to help you figure out how to fix your washing machine. Although this morning I was having some technical issues and AI gave me the same advice 5 times. And I kept saying, I've tried that. I've tried that. I've tried that. And then it would say, try this and give me the exact same set of instructions. So finally I asked it if there was a phone number in a human.
Yeah.
And I talked to, and it said, we don't have a phone number, but here is the email address, and they will set up they'll set up a video chat. Is that what you're looking for? And I'm like, yes, I'm looking for someone who will actually listen to me and help me. And maybe it's a programming flaw, but it also is a signal that there is no real intelligence there. There's no capacity for it to look at the chat history and see that it already gave me that advice and say, well, I tried that. If this, then this. If you've tried this, then try this, right? It can't think in terms of causality, counterfactuals, honestly, anything that isn't a 1 or a 0, right? That's what it's designed for. I think, so someone once told me, some professor or teacher, I honestly don't remember where, but it's become part of my philosophy, that fiction is how thinkers experiment, right? So we have how scientists experiment in labs. Thinkers, by which they meant philosophers, artists, experiment through fiction. And I think that's where these stories that we're talking about here really shine, is showing us. And I think I've said this earlier on the podcast. For me, the difference between fantasy and fiction and science fiction is the scientific method.
Yeah.
So a novel like this, for me, does look like an experiment. If we follow along this line, if we continue to think about AI like this, but also to think about humanity like this and what qualities we are willing to sacrifice, right? Or just simply surrender in order to progress, in order to become ourselves, maybe the perfect slave to AI. We're giving away our agency. We're giving away our intelligence. We're giving away our creativity. We're giving away our rationality. We're giving away our capacity for critical and creative thought, especially critical and creative thought simultaneously, right? Which is what all of these authors really have. What kind of future are we looking at? And maybe it's something like this, where the most human character we see is AI, because humans have abdicated so much of their humanity.
I'm thinking always about one very important danger for humans. In our nature, so we love being lazy. We love habits. We are slaves to our habits. And in order to keep the agency and being really self-aware about the beauty of agency in human beings, we must love difficulties, and we must actually commit to solving problems and actually being all right that we can't solve all of them. And sometimes not solving problems will give us pain. And this is all right. It's part of being human. And I'm wondering whether we can teach students as educators to stay on this path and actually embrace difficulty. And, I mentor leaders, and it might sound as a cliche, but I quote quite a bit Kennedy, who said, "We are flying to the moon not because it is easy. We are flying to the moon because it is difficult." So this attitude will keep humanity in a good shape.
This is what we mean when we talk about the human spirit.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And it is something I fear that we might lose if we continue to abdicate parts of our humanity, surrender it to or outsource it to AI.
And I'm always wondering, how can we change the perspective of students of humanities that is not happening to them, but it's happening with them. And actually, they can build their own AIs with a couple of tools which are not really difficult and not require sophisticated understanding of whatsoever. And then they can have this AI to serve them while being aware how to check for hallucinations, for mistakes, for slope. So if we keep the spirit and are saying this is not someone who is kind of evil and just dictate his power, but you can act. If we come to this world, then ultimately it will be a better place for everyone, and it will actually bridge between humanities and those studying science and mathematics.
I had a really interesting moment in my my fall class where I did my sci-fi, my AI sci-fi and philosophy course, where I was listening to this group of three boys talk about a math test. Right. I was taking attendance, so I was just letting them chat. And I was also kind of, listening with one ear. And they had just had a large exam, and two of them passed and one failed the exam. And one of the ones who passed said, dude, to the guy who failed, dude, didn't you check chat's math before you handed it in? And he was like, wait, you got to do that? And the other one was like, yeah, I noticed it was wrong. So then I went back and checked it. And then I realized like I was spending twice as much time entering in all the information and then checking to see if it was right. And if I had to check to see if it was right, I needed to know if it was right. And it just seemed to make more sense to do the work myself. And the other guy was like, oh, I'm going to have to experiment with that for the next one. And I'm listening, and I just sort of turned to them and I was like, wait, you have to check ChatGPT's math? And they're like, yeah. Of course you do. Of course. You have a PhD. Shouldn't you know this? And I'm like, why are you using it?
Yeah.
What's the point? Have you ever had to check a calculator's math? And they're like, oh. And I'm like, that guy realized, it takes you, like, I tell them on the first day of class, I tell them that story from Food and Wine magazine where ChatGPT didn't know which definition of dressing to give to the columnist. Columnist had said, what is the difference between a sauce and a dressing? Meaning like for a Thanksgiving dinner. And ChatGPT said a sauce is a flavorful accompaniment for a culinary dish, usually meat, chicken, poultry, or vegetable dish. Okay, so you're covering all your bases. A dressing is a clean bandage for a wound. I tell my students this story on the first day, and I say to them, why are you asking the dumbest kid in class to do your homework for you? If you're going to cheat smart. Ask the smartest kid in class, not the dumbest kid. So I'm listening to this conversation and they're like, well, the options are trust it, check it, or do the work yourself. And I'm like, remember what I said on the first day, guys, about getting the smartest kid in class, not the dumbest one to do your homework for you. Like, if you need to check it, then you need to know the math well enough to recognize a wrong.
Absolutely.
Right? Which means you've learned the math. Why pretend, why this extra step? Now I used ChatGPT for a project once to make a bunch of memes from Plato. Actually, I was presenting on the Renaissance reception of Plato's argument against the printing press, right? Against writing. And I kind of morphed it into essentially what Plato would have to say about ChatGPT. But before I got there, I used ChatGPT to create these memes out of Plato in a Renaissance style. That was so much fun, just sort of creating these absurd illustrations that I don't have the talent to do on my own. I'm saying this somewhere where people can hear me. My husband is an artist, right? And he would die if he knew I did this. I haven't told him. So please, shush. It's between you, me, and all of you. Right? On the one hand, it's amazing what we can do with it when we can use it as a supplement for what we are not able to do. So I can have the thought process, this is what I wanted to say, but I can't make it happen with my hand. I don't have that artist skill. Ask my students, they'll tell you my stick figures are terrible. I could have asked my husband to do it, but that would have taken him hours. Right? And then I might have had to pay him. It takes resources. And those of us who use it, or maybe those of you who I try, because of the nature of my work, I don't really use it that often. As a writer and an academic, there's not much it can do for me that's faster and better than what I can do for myself. I don't then have to go back and check to make sure the math works, right? I know it works. We don't think about resources the same way. I'm not thinking about all of the water they're using for these cooling centers. Even those stories are coming out about cities being in drought because of it. There's a real human and environmental impact when we use it. But because that's far away from most of us, I can't see a cooling center out of my windows. Therefore, it doesn't exist. right, doesn't exist. There are air quotes around that. Because of course it exists, but if it's not affecting us directly, it's really easy not to think about it. And I think that's where books like this become so important in giving us the prophecy of the future. This is how seers can now communicate what they see with the rest of us.
Your cooling center reminded me of Coating Machine in the book. But Rae, frankly, I think it was a wonderful conversation. And Klara and the Sun should definitely be on the list of summer readings for many, many students. And actually, those teachers who are very afraid of AI, instead of being afraid, I think the best path is to have a conversation with real people about those pieces of art, just comparing notes, saying what is plausible, what is probable, what is possible. And those are not the same things.
Yeah. And what is avoidable?
And why?
Yes.
Yeah.
The why we forget to ask. We must always ask why. That is how we know we're human. Right? We are able to ask why.
Absolutely. So that was Rae Muhlstock. And if this conversation left you sitting quietly for a moment, then I think that we actually did what Ishiguro intended. And Klara and the Sun, for both of us, is not a book about technology. It's a book about what we ask of the beings we create and whether we are honest with ourselves about the motive, the why we create them. So Klara is asked to observe, to serve, to love, and finally to go quietly, to disappear. And she's doing this with such a grace and elegance that very, very few people can master. I can't wait for the movie to be released. Maybe, Rae, we can somehow connect our schedules and watch the movie for the first time together.
I would love that.
That would be such a treat. And in our next episode, we will continue with exploring literatures and movies dedicated to AI and robotics. And here was your host, Anastassia, with another AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie. And if today's conversation touched something in you, please share it with one of your friends, with your family. It makes a lot of difference. Our community is now 20,000 people listening to this podcast. And until the next time, I will see you next week, and keep your curiosity sharp and your sun and love close. Thank you.